Greetings. In this video I want to discuss the little-known subject of 1West Paleo Cursive, or perhaps we could call it modern Phoenician cursive. It pertains to the, as I said, little-known history of the 1West spectrum attempting to produce a cursive form of the Phoenician script. To set the tone, I wanted to mention that last June there was an interesting video on the Pax Judaica account in which a gentleman who, to my knowledge, is not a member of any mainstream 1West group, but nonetheless is a proponent of Lashon Kodash, even if a slightly adapted form of Lashon Kodash. And in his video, he talked about creating his own form of Lashon Kodash calligraphy, and it essentially was a cursive form of the Phoenician script, of what's called the Paleo Hebrew script. So I just want to play an interesting brief clip where he talks about the similarity of the script that he was developing vis-a-vis Arabic.
But as you can see, it starts approaching what Arabic looks like because the Arabs got their language from our language. They morphed the sounds and also morphed the structure of the letters, eventually resulting in what you see today as Arabic and whatnot. Folk can lie about it. Folk can write books and claim that, you know, their language ran concurrent with ours, or that it even came before ours, like I've seen some ludicrous shit saying and the whole nine. But the truth of the matter is it came from the Paleo. It came from the Hebrew language. It came from our language. Ours is the original.
Two things I wanted to share about that clip. Number one, as is about to be brought out, Pax Judaica did not have to develop his own new cursive form of the Phoenician script, and something like that has already existed within 1West history, and it goes back to 1West itself. Now, I don't know if he considers himself part of the 1West stream. He might be hostile to the 1West stream, for all I know, but nonetheless, he is a proponent of Lashon Kodash, and Lashon Kodash comes out of 1West, and the original school did develop a cursive form of the so-called Paleo Hebrew script, which is about to come out. Moreover, it's interesting in that clip that he, even though he's creating a new script, he seems to insinuate that it looks like Arabic because the Arabs took their script from the Israelites, and he seemed to come dangerously close to implying they took it from his script. But whatever the case, or just maybe he meant that this is the sort of the natural progression of turning the Phoenician script, the Paleo Hebrew script, into more of a cursive or calligraphic form. But it's interesting, I'm about to show a clip from a video from the ISUPK, in which the leader of the ISUPK, Johanna, mentions the rarely discussed cursive Paleo Hebrew, which was developed at 1West, and he too claims that the Arabs took the Arabic script from them. He apparently is still a true believer in the sense that he believes that the cursive form of the Phoenician script, which was developed by 1West, is actually an ancient script. So this is a clip from almost exactly 3 years before Pax Judaica made his video. It's from June of 2016.
I teach Hebrew. Why are you running from the Hebrew? You let them on the internet scare you from the Lashon Kodash.
Right,
they say Lashon Kodash, that ain't right. That ain't right. I ain't never, ever seen a Hebrew group ever go and pull up ancient Hebrew. Not one.
Right.
Not one. Ariah and them scholars back then, them brothers was the only one to pull up the ancient Hebrew and bring it forth out to the front. Don't nobody even touch the script. We don't even teach the script. We have it up on the board, but we don't even teach the ancient script. That's a whole nother level. It's written in script, just like they write that Arabic. That's where the Arabs got it from. We don't even teach that level yet.
So Johanna referred to a script similar to Arabic, which they have but don't teach. On your screen, you'll see here a chart of different scripts which used to be taught at certain points at 1West, and funny enough, I actually spoke years ago, I conversed, not spoke, but corresponded years ago with a former member of the group which came to be called GMS. Before it was called GMS, I don't know what it was called, but it was sort of known as the breakaway group from House of David in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And a member of that group, the sort of proto-GMS, said that there was a period where Tahar was teaching 4 scripts, and I assume it was the 4 scripts that you see on your screen. And so what you see here is the Phoenician script, the standard Ashuri script in the third line, and then the standard Hebrew cursive in the bottom line. But what's interesting is that curious script on the second line. This is the script that Johanna was referring to. It's a cursive equivalent of the Phoenician script, of the Paleo Hebrew script, which you won't find anywhere. This is a script that was created by 1West in the late 20th century. Oh, and by the way, notice that the name of the script is Arya's Writing. Remember that. Remember that the script is called Arya's Writing, as that's going to be relevant. It's going to come up a little bit later in this video. Regarding the history of this subject, I would say it has to begin, in a sense, with the Commandment Keepers, which predates 1West, or the Commandment Keepers' adjacent organization, the Royal Order of Ethiopian Hebrews, which was sort of like a Masonic lodge for Israelites. Whatever the case, the Commandment Keepers taught Hebrew. They taught the standard Hebrew script. However, in addition to teaching the standard Hebrew script, they also taught the standard Hebrew cursive, as you can see here. So remember that Abba Bivens, Arya, and Yaquab, these gentlemen came out of the Commandment Keepers, and therefore they likely learned the standard Hebrew script, the so-called the Ashuri script, as well as the Hebrew cursive there. Aside from that, 1West has always been fond of Ben Yehuda's dictionary, and Ben Yehuda's dictionary had three scripts in it: the Phoenician script, or as it called it, the Old Hebrew script, the standard Ashuri script, which it called the printed script, and then the Hebrew cursive script, which it called the written script, as you can see here. As you scroll through this chart, remember that the cursive form was known as the written script. And here are some class notes from a Lashawan Kodash course at 1West from the early 90s. And the chart here is pretty similar to the chart in Ben Yehuda's dictionary. And you'll notice that it gives the Phoenician script, and then on the right, it gives the cursive form of the Phoenician script, which was created by Arya and is called the writing. The reason why I see the Commandment Keepers and Ben Yehuda's dictionary as relevant to the development of 1West's little-known cursive Paleo Hebrew script is because I suspect that Arya, coming out of the Commandment Keepers and also making recourse to Ben Yehuda's work, noticed that there's a cursive form of the standard Hebrew script, and therefore wanted there to be a corresponding cursive form for the Paleo Hebrew script. I suspect, now this is just purely speculative, but I suspect that's the motivation for creating a fourth script. He had the standard Phoenician script, he had the standard Hebrew script or Ashuri script, he had the Hebrew cursive script, and then he develops a fourth script, the cursive Paleo Hebrew, the sort of Phoenician calligraphy. Anyway, let's get back to Arya's chart from the class notes in the early 90s. On that page are two examples of the so-called cursive Paleo Hebrew. For example, this at the top of the page, as well as at the bottom of the page, where it's stated, quote, the name of the writing is Arya Masha. So let's look at those two samples of the Paleo cursive script from 1West. The top line here is from the top of the page, and the bottom line is from the bottom of the page. I'll transcribe the text into the Phoenician script and the standard Hebrew or Ashuri script. So the top line reads Lashon Kodesh, or as they would prefer, Lashawan Kodash, the Holy Tongue. And then the bottom line from the bottom of the page is Arya Masha. But what does that mean? It's actually two names. Arya is Arya, which is the Lashawan Kodash rendering of the name Ari, and then Masha is the name Moshe in Lashawan Kodash. It's the name of two of the seven heads and also two of the three successors to Abba Bivens, Arya and Masha. Think about that. They named the script after themselves. The name of the script of this purportedly ancient Phoenician cursive was Arya Masha. They named it after themselves. They put their own names into the name of the script that they created. And that should be some rather clear evidence that the script was created by them. And remember when I showed you this chart that's still floating around in certain circles, and I said that to remember that the script is called Arya's Writing. I think that name represents a sort of post-schism name for the script. That is to say, the script was developed before the split between the ICUPK and the House of David, where Arya and Masha split and became the heads of two different groups. So before that split, it was called Arya Masha. But after that split, apparently those who sided with Arya on that split no longer called the script Arya Masha, they called it Arya's writing. At least that would be my guess as to why the name of the script changed, where before the split it was called Arya Masha, and now there's versions of it floating around where it's called simply Arya's script. That's my guess, that it's related to the split. Now, if the fact that the name of the script was Arya Masha is not enough evidence that it was created by Arya and Masha, we actually have the testimony of Nathaniel, formerly known as Nathaniel Alaga, a former member of the old school at 1West, who's now the head of IUIC. In his interview with Sam Kestenbaum from 2 years ago, he recounted how he asked Masha about the fact that he couldn't find the cursive form of the Paleo Hebrew script anywhere, and he recounted that Masha told him, matter-of-factly, that they made it up. Here, listen to this.
I know we had the
I mean, was Arya the person who revealed or introduced that language to
yes
the community? Okay.
They had a Hebrew script which looked very similar to Arabic. It looked similar to that. So I remember sitting down with Masha. I said, "Hey, where can I find this? Because I could go to books and see the ancient Hebrew in what's that guy's name? Who wrote the Hebrew? What's his name? From Jerusalem. Ben Yehuda, right. Eliezer Ben Yehuda. Thank you, brothers. Eliezer Ben Yehuda. You familiar with him?
Yes. I hadn't heard this kind of Arabicized.
Oh, I'm glad you reminded me about that. So I asked him, I said, I can see the ancient Hebrew in books like Eliezer Ben Yehuda, but where did the script come from? He said, we made that up. I said, oh. So all that always stuck in my mind. It always stayed with me. So I didn't make a big thing of it. I just filed it.
By the way, it's worth noting here that there are a number of people within the 1West spectrum who are angry at Nathaniel about his skepticism about Lashwan Kodash. There's also a number of people who are angry at him for not explicitly and constantly using the standard names for the Father and the Son that were developed at 1West. However, it should be noted that the names that are popular in 1West hinge on an assumption of Lashwan Kodash. Now, I don't know what goes on within IUIC. Maybe they're still using those names in select settings. But nonetheless, if the critics of Nathaniel, the 1Wester critics of Nathaniel, are correct in their assumption that he no longer uses either name, well, then it should be that should be understood within the context of his skepticism of Lashwan Kodash. And his skepticism of Lashwan Kodash should be understood against the backdrop of him being told that some of the things that were taught to him, that were taught at the old school, were simply made up by people like Arya and Masha. Now, it needs to be understood. Now you see people like Tahar saying that, acceptance of Lashwan Kodash is a thing of faith. Well, that begs the question, if Nathaniel knows that Arya and Masha were making certain things up, then why should he take their word merely on blind faith when it comes to the language? It's an interesting question. Whatever the case, the whole point of this video was to bring out the little-known history of the cursive form of the Phoenician script that was developed by 1West. And I hope people found this interesting. I look forward to the comments of others. As always, God bless.